Hey, supply chainers, wherever you are in the world, this is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain.
Good morning and happy April Fool's Day. I promise this is not an April Fool's joke. Sarah is just having some well-deserved time off. My name is Katie Date and I'm here to guest host today. I have the pleasure of having a guest on that I've known through many stages of life to talk about some of my favorite topics, sustainability and women growing in supply chain. But before we get started, we do have some housekeeping items that I would like to point you to. I would like to point you to our 2 episodes of the week, episodes 460 and 461. The 460 is Eric Downing, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Werner. And episode 461, this is going to be a great one. This episode is part of our special series that was filmed at Manifest and features Bill Catania, the CEO of OneRail, and Anna Favreau of PepsiCo. I'd also like to share with you some of our upcoming events that we would love for you to come to, both our in-person events at the JOC Breakbulk and Project Cargo Conference, as well as the Home Delivery World Conference. Next up for us will be the upcoming show. Sarah will be back on Wednesday, April 9th for Is Your Forecast Lying to You, featuring our friends at Manhattan. That is one not to be missed. So now that the housekeeping is over, I have the pleasure of bringing on my colleague and friend, Namuun. Thank you so much for being with us today. So maybe to
Thanks,
get
Katie.
started, if you just want to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm Namoon. I'm currently in supply chain decarbonization at Amazon's Worldwide Sustainability team. I'd say my journey in supply chain has been quite interesting. I was actually born and raised in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, which happens to be the coldest capital in the world. And I think that background's given me quite a unique perspective on sustainability and supply chain challenges. So really excited to talk about that today. I currently live in Seattle with my 3 kids and my husband. But I've spent about about a decade, I'm going to say 13 years almost in the US, traveling around the US. And yeah, in the supply chain space. So I started out as a management consultant, helping Fortune 500 companies optimize their procurement and supply chain operations across heavy industries like rail, steel, construction. And then from there, I moved into more operational roles in the consumer goods industry, where I led sourcing strategies, supply chain operations, and here I am now. I think really with my main focus on transportation, optimizing the network for carbon emissions. So decarbonization, I should say, not for increasing, but decreasing carbon emissions. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that we always do on Thoughts and Coffee is we have our guest share just a quick little market insight from your little slice of the supply chain world. So, I would love your quick little market insight.
Sure. I mean, since we're talking about sustainability, I thought it'd be best to talk on that in regards to supply chain sustainability. So, I think what we're seeing lately, and I think it's increased over the past years, is industry-wide collaboration. That's been really creating real impact, right? So, for example, shipping, right? We're seeing major companies teaming up to create zero emissions shipping corridors, aiming to cut maritime emissions by 50% by 2030. In manufacturing, we have the First Movers Coalition, committing billions to buy low carbon materials like green steel and sustainable aviation fuel. And in fashion, we have brands in the Fashion Pact that are working together to reduce water use and cut textile waste through shared recycling programs. Training is also a key focus, where programs like Supplier Locked are bringing together like industry leaders to train thousands of suppliers on how to measure and reduce their carbon footprints. And so I think all of this is really showing that partnerships are good for business, but also it's sort of the new norm We're in this together, and the future of sustainable supply chain isn't a competition. It's about, collective action.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The key word that I got out of that is collaboration, and collaboration across the supply chain, I think is so important, and
Yeah.
sustainability particularly is such an important piece of that. So
Yeah.
thank you for that insight. And now we'll move on to the weekly poll, which was very divisive on LinkedIn. Music is always something that it seems like people can't agree on. And for me, the
Mm,
most interesting part of this poll was the comments. I
mm.
voted for "Don't Stop Believing," but I don't know. What about you?
I have an other vote. So I was trying to think of something that also was related to Earth Month and like sustainability, and so maybe I was a little biased from the get-go, knowing that we were, going to be talking about this live. So price tag is the one that I had sort of popped in my head. I don't know if you Jesse J. The other one was "Here Comes the Sun" by Beatles. Is just sort of uplifting, and it's almost summer, so those are the two that I think our team would enjoy in the office.
No, that's great. I'm a huge Beatles fan,
Yeah.
and here in the Northeast, we've had nothing but rain and no sun. So I could take a little "Here Comes the Sun."
Yep, same.
So
Seattle, as you know, winters are rainy, so
yeah,
we're ready
yeah.
for fun.
No, totally. Okay, so I would love to get into the articles that we shared from the
Mhm.
audience. I'm loving to see all these comments. I don't know if you've seen, we have people from Pakistan, we have people joining us from the West Coast.
That's
So
awesome.
Ethiopia. So
Cool.
it's really great to see this wide ranging audience, and I think it's a testament to supply chain and
Mhm.
sustainability, how global it is.
Yeah.
So, to
Uh,
get started, we'll talk about your blog. So, it was to the mom applying for grad school. And this, for me, I read it at a time when I was a brand new mom.
mhm.
And there's so many messages from this that really stood out to me. But one of the big things is that in this unlikely time, you are able to find your calling to supply chain and to sustainability specifically. So, if you can share for the audience a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's interesting how, life's pivotal moments often come when we least expect them. So, like you said, for me, that moment came during my first pregnancy. I was in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, visiting my parents, and I was 8 months pregnant, sitting in the back of a cab. I remember distinctly just struggling to breathe because of the severe smog that had enveloped the city that year. The smog was largely caused by rapid urbanization happening as people moved from rural areas to the city seeking jobs, better opportunities. And then I think that experience just made me look deeper into why mass migration was happening. And what I discovered at the time was that many of these environmental and social challenges could be traced back to supply chain inefficiencies. Rural communities, at least back home, lacked the proper logistics and supply chain infrastructure to sustain local businesses and resources. And so I think this realization hit differently as I was preparing, to bring a child into the world. It wasn't just like an academic or professional interest anymore. It became truly personal. And I think the irony is that, and I sort of say it I think in the blog that many see parenthood, motherhood as like a time to step back from career ambitions. I think it actually crystallized my purpose. I've been working in, supply chain procurement consulting and operations, but this experience, I think, really helped me see how supply chains could be leveraged, not just for business efficiency, but for environmental and social impact. So it may seem like, I think at the time, supply chain management, or now, is an obvious field of study, but um, given how the pandemic has put supply chain issues in the spotlight, I think people think so, but it wasn't at the time. I was always thinking of going back to graduate school. I wasn't really sure for what and what specific field, but I knew with that experience exactly where I needed to focus on, and that led me to my graduate school, my graduate degree in supply chain management, where I eventually had the opportunity to do some research on sustainable supply chains. Um, yeah, and I guess another thing maybe just to note there is um, I actually think personal concerns, maybe of something that bothered you or your child or your family, could actually turn into something, right? And really become more of a calling. So I always say, like, pay attention to those things. Like, what are some things that your gut's telling you, or some things that you're just naturally drawn to or interested in? And I think that's exactly what happened for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to dig into that a little bit more because it's such
Mhm.
a powerful story about how personal experience shaped your professional path. So some people out there know we met while you were at MIT,
Mhm.
and at that time you took a significant step outside of your comfort zone to pursue a graduate degree at MIT. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, is there any advice that you would give to other mothers who are considering to make, a bold move in their career or education, especially in fields like sustainability, which can seem, kind of daunting?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't just, limit it to mothers. I think all parents, right? The first advice I is like, reframe how we think about parenthood in relation to career moves. I think often we see being a parent as like a limitation when considering big changes like graduate school or career transitions, the next research topic or the next big, project or innovation. But in my experience, I think parenthood has actually given me strengths I didn't know I had. And then again, this turned out to be incredibly valuable in supply chain and sustainability work. After all, parenting and I think sustainable supply chain management require both long-term thinking, ability to balance multiple stakeholder needs, and creative problem solving. So I think when you're a parent, you're already managing complex logistics, optimizing resources, and thinking about long-term impacts. And I think these are the same skills needed in sustainable supply chain work, for example. Um, I think in my perspective, I think as a parent actually helped me better understand the human impact of supply chain decisions and like the urgency of sustainability initiatives. So really for the better. Maybe a second piece of advice is to focus on the process rather than fixating on like the perfect outcome. One thing parenthood taught me is that success isn't about doing everything perfectly, as I'm sure many parents know. It's not possible. It's about showing up consistently and making progress. And I think that mindset is particularly important in sustainability work, where the challenges are just overwhelming. You read the news, and they tend to not usually not highlight the best of what's happening, right? And I think just like in parenting, it's about making that consistent improvement rather than waiting for the perfect solution or the perfect set of data. Many of our supply chain practitioners know that, we have to estimate and make, the best estimate and assumption in certain cases where we don't have perfect data. So I think that's really helped me in that avenue as well. And then I think finally, I'd encourage parents to just trust their instincts about timing. There's never a perfect time to make a bold move, um, whether it's like entering the supply chain field or focusing on a sustainability project or initiative in your company. I think if you feel drawn to the work, it's worth paying attention to. And the field needs diverse perspective. And I think parents often bring unique insight, mothers and dads especially, about resource management, efficiency, long-term sustainability. I think insights that really come from our daily experience. And so, but I also want to preface, to be honest, I'm learning to take my own advice. There are plenty of days when I just need to remind myself, like, of these perspectives that I'm just sharing. It's definitely easier said than done. And I think I found myself just returning to these mindsets and going back to that blog post sometimes and be like, oh yeah, I said that. And that really helps make, the challenging days more manageable.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's definitely something that I'm working on, taking more of my own advice
Yeah.
and taking to heart more of the things that I tell everyone else. So it's always good to have those types of things, in
Yeah.
writing so that you can go back and explore them. So I'd love to
Hmm.
pivot a little bit. We're currently in Earth Month, the
Yeah.
first day. I'm curious, how has your perspective on sustainability evolved since that moment in, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Ulaanbaatar, to your current
You
work?
got it. Yeah.
So, how do you see the role in supply chain management in addressing global environmental challenges that we're highlighting during this month?
Yeah. Um, It's interesting to reflect on this evolution in a good way, right? I think that moment in Ulaanbaatar, you said it really well, by the way, opened my eyes to how interconnected these challenges are. What seemed like an air quality issue is actually tied to rapid urbanization, which is itself a symptom of like inadequate supply chain infrastructure in rural areas. They're all connected, right? And I think the systems level understanding has really only deepened as I've progressed in my career. When I first started in this field, I thought sustainability was mainly about reducing emissions from transportation or using less packaging, recycling, right? But now I see it as something much more fundamental. Supply chains aren't just about moving goods from point A to point B. They're about how we use resources, where we source materials, and how we can redesign entire systems to become more sustainable. So it's fascinating to see how the field has evolved, as I've kind of grown in this area. Sustainability has moved from being a nice to have to a core business imperative. And I think, well, Earth Month is a great time to highlight these issues. I think what excites me about working in supply chain is that we have the opportunity to drive sustainable practices every day of the year. And companies are increasingly realizing that sustainable supply chains are often more resilient and more efficient in the long run.
Great. So the article that's on the screen, this is from when you were at MIT, and
Mhm.
you researched the trade-offs that companies face when trying to reduce their carbon footprint while also maintaining high service levels and controlling costs. Can you
Mhm.
share with the audience some of the key findings from this research that may
Yeah.
surprise them?
Yeah, let me just maybe provide some context first for those who haven't had a chance to read it. And I think you did a great job also providing some context. So our research tackled what's called a green facility location problem. I think all our supply chain peeps out there probably have heard of facility location problem, but the green part of it is, I think, what's interesting and new. So it was on a middle mile transportation network in e-commerce. And that's really like the movements of goods between facilities before they reach the final customer. We used mathematical modeling to create what's known as Pareto frontier of like thousands of scenarios, which essentially mapped out all the possible optimal solutions where you're trying to balance multiple objectives of carbon emissions, cost, and delivery time. I think what made this research particularly relevant was that we were trying to answer real world questions like, could companies feasibly meet their global emission reduction goals? Would traditional solutions like intermodal transportation or renewable energy be enough to meet those goals? And then what would the trade-offs look like? So one of our most striking findings was that business as usual, so simply that just simply won't get us there. Companies won't reach any of their science-based targets if they continue with traditional approaches. I think this sounds obvious, but I think having the data to prove was critical. What surprised many was that even traditional solutions like intermodal transportation or purchasing renewable energy alone weren't enough on their own to significantly decrease carbon emissions. And our research showed that to meet science-based targets, companies need to make a dramatic transition, and specifically moving to 100% alternative fuel transportation in their vehicle mix. And I think this is where it also got interesting. Well, the transition does come with trade-offs. There weren't as severe as many might expect. We found that for the network we studied, the increase in variable cost was about 30 to 30%, 33%. And then the delivery time increased by only 9% compared to current practices. So these numbers are significant, but they're not insurmountable. Especially when companies take a strategic approach to implementation and it's across, over multiple years. I think the most important finding was that the question isn't whether to invest in green vehicles or, alternative fuels, but rather which types of alternative fuel vehicles to invest in. And then, based on your specific priorities, if cost is your primary concern, you might focus on infrastructure for long distance electric trucks and rail. If delivery time is critical, you might need to look at solutions like biofuel planes, right? So it really kind of shifted our focus from like, should we be doing this to like, how, what should you choose? Like, what from the options, what makes most sense for your business? So I think that was the most interesting finding for us.
Yeah, that's great. And
Yeah.
this is just my little shout out to the MIT SCM program,
Yes.
because all of the projects that the students are doing
Mhm.
there have real world data and you're working with
Mhm.
real world problems. And I think that's just, it's so valuable. And to be able to share these findings and then build on these findings, you know, in your current work, I think
Mhm.
um is really impactful.
Mhm.
So now that you're at Amazon, you've
Mhm.
continued your work in sustainability. Can you share a little bit more about what you're doing and what you're focused on?
Yeah, definitely. I actually have had the opportunity to work across different aspects of supply chain sustainability, I think at Amazon. So from sustainable packaging initiatives to network design optimization, and now I'm really focusing on supplier engagement for decarbonization. I think particularly I'm working on enabling procurement so that they can better support our supplier partners in driving decarbonization in our supply chain. As you know, procurement teams are uniquely positioned to influence supply chain sustainability. And so and also just coming as a procurement practitioner, it's really been fulfilling. And I could see the impact of making sure that these supplier facing teams do have the right knowledge and tools to have those meaningful conversation with our suppliers so that they really move the needle with our suppliers. I'm also just really excited, honestly, but through this role to see the evolution of procurement's role in supplier decarbonization. You know, about a decade ago when I was doing it, or 5 years ago when I was in a different company, also, um, working on some aspect of procurement or sourcing. I can really see that shift from traditional buying metrics to including now sustainability criteria in supplier selection and development. And so now procurement teams may need to understand carbon accounting and size-based targets, and how to evaluate suppliers' sustainability initiatives, for example, and know what types of support, right, that our sustainability expertise and leadership and teams would need to provide, right, and really figure out what that collaboration looks like for the business team versus sustainability teams. Um, and yeah, just exciting to see it transform from like a commercial function to one that actually drives sustainable innovation through the supply chain. Yeah, I think when we empower these teams with the right knowledge and tools, you can really start to see and create that incremental and meaningful impact when we think about supply chain decarbonization.
Yeah. So the in the third article,
Hmm.
it emphasizes how supply chains run the world, but can also save the world. As someone who has worked across, you know, several different aspects of sustainable supply chains, what do you see as the most promising developments in making global supply chains truly sustainable, particularly when it comes to managing sustainability
Yeah,
across different tiers of suppliers?
yeah. I think Yeah, several promising developments. I think, and I'm an optimist too, so you can also take some of this with a grain of salt. But really, I am quite optimistic with one. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how I think companies view supply chain sustainability. It's not. I talked about procurement kind of being a green job, right? And so similarly, I think supply chain sustainability is no longer just about risk management or compliance, but about creating value, driving innovation. Companies are realizing that sustainable supply chains are often more resilient and efficient in the long run, as we've seen as part of the pandemic. And then second, technology, I think, is enabling unprecedented transparency and traceability across supply chain tiers, right? The article delves a little bit into it, but the visibility is crucial because we discussed earlier about emissions, and I think the article touches upon this, but often around 80% lie in the supply chain. So better data analytics and are helping us understand and address sustainability challenges at their source. And then third, I think particularly exciting, we're seeing more collaboration. I talked a little bit about this during our market insights segment. But yeah, collaboration across industries between competitors. Companies are realizing that no one can solve these challenges alone, whether they're sharing best practices, jointly investing in green infrastructure, or creating common standards for supplier sustainability. I think this collective action is going to drive systemic change that we need in all of the tiers, right? Because sometimes my tier one, maybe your tier three or your tier two, and it can really depend on our category and our industry. But systemic change, I think, is really what we need. And then think maybe the most promising is the evolution in how we engage with suppliers. Instead of just imposing requirements, most companies are taking a partnership approach. They're providing education. We talked about supplier locked as a partnership across, different industry leaders and educating thousands of suppliers on decarbonization. So providing education, technical support, financial incentives to help suppliers improve their sustainability performance. This is really where procurement and supplier facing teams would come in, as we think about selection criteria, embedding sustainability into selection criteria, and contracts and negotiation, et cetera. So I think this is critical because true sustainability really does require transformation across all tiers of the supply chain. And I think the things that I just shared really does touch all tiers. I think I should probably just also add that it's still evolving. I think we're still learning and adapting our approach, because this is all new. Everyone's like fed. We're all sort of in this together. There's all new challenges and new opportunities emerge. Almost every day is a new day. And I think what keeps me optimistic is just seeing how the supply chain community is increasingly embracing its potential to drive this change.
Super. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, like I told you when we started, this is going to be the fastest, 30 minutes, and we're almost at the end of our time. So, maybe to wrap up, can you just share your vision for the future of global sustainable supply chains for our audience?
Yeah, I think what I just said, right, is collaboration, learning from each other, learning from each other's best practices, learning again from each other's maybe oopsies, right? Hey, these are the things that we should avoid. So I think collaboration is key. And I'm seeing this already, in my work and other organizations and industry events that I've attended, just people being so willing and being an open book to talk about what's worked for them and what's not worked for them, and how we can really kind of grapple, I think, the problem of our century, right, together. So I just want to end it at that. Like, I encourage you all to not be a lone soldier. Go out there, go participate and be part of groups, be part of communities that are working in this, maybe the specific subject, a problem that you're trying to tackle in your day to day. And I think you would just be surprised at how much people are willing to open up and share about their experiences, but also how much you are able to provide and give and reciprocate. So that's what I'd encourage the most. And I think that's what I love about this podcast, but also about what you do, Katie. I think your actual day job of, getting people together to share experiences and best practices. So we're all moving forward together, right? And not leaving anybody behind.
Thank you so much, Namuun. It, as always, is a pleasure to talk to you. You are so inspiring and so kind and insightful in how you motivate people into sustainability. And like I said, just a true inspiration. So thank you for your time and for being with us today. For all of the listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see such a global audience from all over the world joining us. And I remind all of you to check out the upcoming episodes of Let's Talk Supply Chain and Thoughts and Coffee, as well as join Sarah at some of the live events that she will be at in the future. With that, I thank you all and wish you a fantastic day.